This is the story of a man who, despite his limited natural athletic talent, turned himself into a world-class athlete.
1931. C'est l'Angleterre qui arrive en finale et comme par hasard, il pleut. Fred Perry et Hughes
Then created a brand that changed sports fashion forever. The 1890s and the first decade of the 20th century were an exciting time to be in France. It was the middle of the Belle Époque, and the country was experiencing unprecedented economic growth. The culture of Paris and fashions were changing, and designers were paying attention to new styles of everyday clothes and holiday dresses. Paul Poiret was beginning the movement in women's wear that would give the world flappers, shorter skirts, an end to the corset, and with them, steps towards women's liberation. At the turn of the century, there was more money than ever in Paris, but the section of the population who held the money was becoming smaller and smaller. Paris at the time was largely a rentier society. Rentiers were people who lived off of their inherited wealth, making income off of properties or investments. And while rentiers made up only around 10% of the population, they held 70% of the population's wealth. And on July 2nd, 1904, at 28 Rue Albouy, in the Paris's 10th arrondissement, one such rentier was born. His name, René Lacoste. The future creator of a beloved sportswear brand was born into a family of aristocrats. His father, Jean-Jules, was a thoroughly modern man, a championship rower and a pioneer in the car industry. Jean-Jules' industrious spirit, love of sport and strong work ethic would become an example for René in all he did. René's father had founded a new business, J. Lacoste & Co., the year before René was born, and would use it to create and patent many automotive innovations. It was his plan, as he toiled away, that he would one day transfer this impressive and lucrative automotive empire to his son. So, from a young age, he made sure the boy learned the sciences and was trained in an analytical mindset. René's whole life was planned out ahead of him, but just one trip would change his life. When René was only 15, he accompanied his father on a fateful business trip. During his travels, René saw a tennis match, and it set his heart on fire. René quickly became so passionate about the idea of playing tennis that he refused to follow in his father's footsteps. The path Jean-Jules had carefully and lovingly laid out for him was to be abandoned. When René announced his new career path, his father was upset. However, Jean-Jules Lacoste soon came around. He announced that he'd allow René to pursue tennis under just one condition. Within 5 years, René was to become an Olympic champion. Now, Jean-Jules Lacoste was not a stupid man and understood that this was a rather short time for a man who had never played sports to become a professional, let alone a world-class athlete. René too understood the seeming impossibility of the challenge, but he nonetheless accepted his father's condition. Though René was always short and thin, he transformed himself into a world-class player. And he did it within 3 years. Lacoste won 7 Grand Slam singles titles in the French, American, and British championships. How is that possible? He changed himself completely. He changed himself completely by training both his body and his mind. To beat the odds and become the best tennis player, René had to invent new ways of training. So he developed the first machine that served tennis balls. He was the first to cover the sleeves of his tennis rackets with adhesive tape for better grip, a method that would later be adopted on all tennis courts. And he read as much as he could, mastering tennis from an intellectual perspective. He immersed himself in the theory behind tennis, so he could truly understand its ins and outs. And all of his hard mental and physical work paid off. In fact, René was the #1 player in the world for both 1926 and 1927. In all, Lacoste won 11 majors, 7 singles, 4 doubles, and is considered by many to be the best of the 4 French players who made up the famous 4 Musketeers. But there comes a point in every athlete's career when they know that their time as a player has come to an end, and they need to decide what comes next. René was fragile by nature and often ill. After suffering from a particularly difficult bout of pneumonia, at 24, René concluded his career in professional sports. Some retired athletes became coaches and trainers. Some become journalists, announcers, critics, or investors. And some just dedicate their lives to their families. But René, having inherited his father's entrepreneurial spirit and sense for business, saw an opportunity to fill a gap in sportswear and decided to focus on building a business. As a businessman, he patented a wide variety of new inventions for the sport of tennis and beyond. But the main event in the life of René Lacoste began with an idea he had before he retired from tennis. In 1927, he had commissioned the making of a polo shirt. At this time, he was still playing tennis regularly and was personally concerned with the fact that the clothes were just plain uncomfortable. See, there was no uniform for tennis. Most tennis players hit the court in trousers and knitted sweaters over formal, button-down shirts. These clothes itched and pricked the skin when worn for any particularly rigorous activity, and worse, they hindered movement. Tennis wear at the time was a real torture for athletes. Even the lighter tennis whites, comprised of white flannel white trousers and formal shirts, brought into fashion in 1900 by the tennis players Frank and Lawrence Doherty, were only marginally more comfortable. And, though tennis whites didn't strictly require it, the habit of wearing a warm sweater over them remained. They were uncomfortable and heavy, and the total weight of clothes could reach as much as 7 pounds. René didn't like that his shirt and sweater constantly interfered with attempts at speedy gameplay, restricting arm movements and trapping in heat. He didn't like the closed shirt cuffs of the formal shirts or the weight of the itchy wool sweaters. He wanted more freedom of movement and the opportunity to make his backswing stronger during a pitch. Being an aristocrat and perfectionist, he could not afford to look unsightly. So, existing undershirt t-shirts would not do, and so the idea was born to create a polo shirt. René created his own clothes that were both stylish and practical. A stroke of genius which became the first specially sewn sportswear for tennis. The polo shirt was significantly lighter than the old clothes, weighing less than half a pound, almost halving the weight of the traditional tennis shirt alone, worn by his competitors, let alone sweaters. But the true advantage of the polo was in the freedom of movement it gave. With unrestricted arm and shoulder movements, there wasn't any worry about tearing your clothes. When he appeared in a short-sleeved cotton shirt in competition and successfully won his next tournament, many of his colleagues paid attention to his clothing upgrade. Though the whole picture of his business was not yet formed in his mind, that idea and his performance marked the moment René Lacoste became an influential pioneer of sports tennis fashion. The first polo shirt was named 1212, a thoughtful name loaded with meaning by René. Here's what each aspect means. The number 1 stands for the cotton peak fabric. The number 2 indicates the length of the sleeve, with 2 telling you that the polo shirt has a short sleeve. And the number 12 is the model number of the shirt. And this system extends within the brand. So, for example, the same peak polo shirt with a long sleeve is marked as 1312, 3 for the longer sleeve. And today, the letter L for Lacoste has been added to the beginning of this marking, meaning the original shirt is now coded as L1212. So, having already made a stir with his first shirt design, it made sense for René to pursue that thought further after finishing his career as an athlete. He would not need to stray far from his beloved tennis while doing work only he could do, developing better and improved high-end sportswear, starting with the famous polo shirt. In 1933, René founded La Société Chemise Lacoste with André Gillier. The company, predictably, started by producing a version of the tennis shirt that Lacoste had worn when he was playing. But as they were heading into production, René was faced with an unexpected problem. They needed a logo. The name was settled. He knew he would put his name on the company, as his father had done before him, but he had no idea what logo to choose. Then, like a strike of lightning, it hit him. His old nickname given to him by Boston sports writer George Cairns while playing tennis in America, the Crocodile. This nickname described René perfectly, said Cairns' grandson in an interview. Tenacious on his grip, flashing an omnivorous, toothy grin, he was relentless and chewed up his opponent slowly. But without a doubt, the valise was the genesis of it. Lacoste embraced the nickname Crocodile, saying that it highlighted my tenacity on the tennis courts, never giving up my prey. In honor of his nickname, René Lacoste's friend Robert George had embroidered a crocodile onto a blazer that Lacoste wore for his matches. Once the idea had entered his mind, it was an easy call. A crocodile logo was sewn onto the chest of each shirt, and with that came another lasting legacy. Lacoste was the first brand to bring their logo to the forefront of the product. Until that time, all logos were sewn into the inside of the product. The idea took off. The shirts were a hit, and soon the factory was also producing polo shirts for golf and sailing. René Lacoste continued to innovate while keeping careful control over each new collection the brand created. He believed that everything Lacoste made should be of high quality, and his vision succeeded. Over the next 20 years, Lacoste successfully conquered all of Europe. Then he turned his attention to America. In 1951, the first shipment of goods was delivered, and Lacoste began his quest to conquer the US market. He signed a partnership with the American brand Izod, and soon Lacoste polo shirts were being sold in the New World under Izod Lacoste brand. The sales were fantastic, as a huge number of Americans quickly fell in love with polo shirts and a host of other Izod Lacoste products. Another smashing success for René, and one that came relatively easy to him. René Lacoste headed his company, Lacoste, until 1963, retiring just before his 60th birthday. His son, Bernard Lacoste, took over as head of the company, perhaps an ironic twist, considering that René himself had refused to do the same for his father. By 1970, Bernard, the talented son of René, was making changes to the company. He was anticipating changes in the world and decided to take the bull by the horns. The company's product line was increasing significantly. In addition to the iconic Lacoste polo t-shirts, they began making tennis shoes, everyday shirts, shorts, sunglasses, and even leather goods. His predictions were good. The company's popularity and sales continued to grow. Today, the Lacoste polo shirt with a crocodile on the chest has transcended sportswear and just about conquered the whole world.
I'm proud to be the new crocodile.
However, under Bernard, the company did make one slight misstep. Over the years, Lacoste's brand policy for the US changed dramatically. From their high-end roots, Lacoste, for a time, became rather ordinary. In the 1990s, Lacoste polo shirts found their way into the mainstream, even being sold directly in supermarkets. Despite origins as a brand worn exclusively by the rich and famous, mass reproduction briefly reduced Lacoste's perceived value significantly. Soon, however, the French management of the brand saw the devaluation and realized they'd made a mistake. They reversed course and worked to return the brand to its former glamour. They opened up luxury boutiques on the high-end avenues of New York, removed their products from supermarkets, and made it so that crocodile shirts could only be obtained by visiting expensive, conceptual stores or high-end department stores like Macy's and Bloomingdale's. And that misstep, arguably, did have a positive side effect. Mass market exposure they might never otherwise have gotten in the US. Lacoste products today have a great brand image. They're bright, preppy, and stylish, associated again with success. CEOs of the golf course and young, bright, ambitious people. Now, everyone knows Lacoste, but not everyone can buy it. An ideal situation for a brand that wants to be seen as exclusive. René Lacoste invented the polo shirt. He created the tennis ball machine to work on his overhead. But those aren't the only things he invented. He also created the first steel tennis racket and a host of other innovations, filing 20 new patents from his retirement from Lacoste in the 1960s to the 1980s, still creating and inventing 50 years after he retired from professional sports. "Inventor should be on my business card," Lacoste once said. "I've been inventing all my life." In the final years of his long life, René Lacoste was faced with serious health issues. He suffered from prostate cancer, and in early October of 1996, he broke his leg. He had surgery on the broken leg, but never came out of the hospital. 4 days after the surgery, on October 12, 1996, he died in Saint-Jean-de-Luz in his native France. He passed away in his sleep from heart failure. He was 92 years old. René Lacoste was inventive, tenacious, and courageous. A crocodile. He fought a hard fight against a deadly disease, not allowing cancer to be what took his life. And like King Midas, everything he touched turned to gold. He achieved everything he wanted, and he left behind a lasting stamp on the world of sports, a brand that remains a status symbol. His legacy is still seen today in the aesthetic of professional tennis players and other athletes around the world. René Lacoste, a true innovator.